Hi guys, so I'm on Team A for the FMS Securities case. So in number 1, we are asked why the T-bond return is shown to be independent. Well, T-bonds are typically the most risk-free investments there are because they are backed by the government, so the chance of default is not extremely likely. However, there is still a little bit of risk with every investment, even in a T-bond. So if the government were to default or if something like inflation were to occur, then this return is not guaranteed. In number 2, we are asked to calculate the expected return of the 4 alternatives. So we do this by taking the probability of each state and multiplying it by the return for that state as predicted. So doing this gives us a T-bond expected return of 3%, Entergy's of 7.5%, Freeport's of 5.9%, and the S&P 500 at 9%, which is the highest and probably the best investment for someone that wants the most return. On number 3, we are asked to calculate the standard deviation, which is a measure of the volatility of a fund when compared to its returns over a certain period of time. We are also asked to calculate the coefficient of variation, which is also a measure of risk. However, this time it is compared to the actual expected rate of returns for that investment. So the standard deviation is a better measure because it's relative rather than absolute. Doing this provides us with the following standard deviations and CVs as shown in the Excel spreadsheet. On number 4, we are asked what would happen if an investor put $10,000 into Freeport and $10,000 into Entergy. According to my calculations, the expected return for this portfolio would be 6.7%, standard deviation would be 2.08%, and the coefficient of variation would be 0.31. But if someone were to put 75% in Freeport, 25% in Entergy, the expected return would be 6.3%, the standard deviation would be 2.91, and the CV would be 0.46. Now doing the opposite and putting 25% into Freeport, 75% in Entergy would give us the highest expected return at 7.1%. In number 5, we are asked to now consider a portfolio that consists of 10,000 in Entergy and 10,000 in the S&P. This would give us an expected return of 8.25%, which is higher than the previous calculations. On number 6, we are asked what would happen if an investor had a portfolio of one stock and then started to add more randomly selected stocks. Well, doing this would most likely cause the risk of the portfolio to decrease because you are diversifying. However, it does depend on how risky each security is. So basically, diversifiable risk is also known as unsystematic risk because it represents the risk that can be decreased through different diversification methods. On the other hand, market risk cannot be controlled by a company, so it's known as the systematic risk. This could happen during interest rate spikes, political turmoil, or other events that a company has no control on. And the total risk is just the combination of these two types of risk, the systematic, which is the market risk, and the unsystematic, which is the diversifiable risk. And number 7, we are now asked to do a regression comparing the 5 years and their returns. So by doing this, we find the R squared, which is the systematic risk, and we find the beta, or the X variable 1. Basically, the slope coefficient line is the beta, and it's significant because it allows investors to measure the volatility of a stock in comparison to the index. So as you can tell, we do our regression for each of the securities, and we get the overall betas to be 0 for the T-bond, 0.64 for Entergy, and negative 0.38 for the Freeport company. Now on number 8, we are asked to plot the security market line and then find the required rate of return using the CAPM approach. Doing this gives us 6.6% expected return, but when we increase the market risk premium to 7%, we get an expected return of 7.2%, and when we increase the beta to 1, we get 9%, which makes sense because it is higher than that 6.6% because that was found using a beta of 0.6. Number 9, we are asked what would happen if we increase the risk-free rate by 3%, so it's now 6%, and we get an expected rate of 7.8%. And finally, in number 10, we are asked what would happen to the risk of Entergy if we decrease the long-term debt to total assets from 1994 to 2004 and so on after that. Well, by doing this, the overall riskiness of Entergy would decrease because as debt is decreasing, so is the beta, and it shows that a business is willing and able to put down its debt, so the required rate of return on equity would also decrease because the lower the risk, the lower the return. Thank you.